on, everybody, let's sing ni hao. Come on, everybody, let's sing ni hao. Come on, everybody, let's sing ni hao, ni hao, ni hao. Salam. Come on, everybody, let's sing salam. Come on, everybody, let's sing salam. Come on, everybody, let's sing salam, salam, salam. Let's clap konnichiwa. Come on, everybody, clap, clap, konnichiwa. Come on, everybody, clap your konnichiwa. Come on, everybody, clap, clap, konnichiwa, 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 konnichiwa. Clap jumbo. Come on, everybody, clap, clap jumbo. Come on, everybody. Come on, everybody, clap, clap jumbo, jumbo. How about stand up? Come on, everybody, stand up. Come on, everybody, stand up. Hello. Come on, everybody, stand up. Hello, hello, hello. Wiggle, wiggle, bonjour. Come on, everybody, wiggle, wiggle, bonjour. Come on, everybody, wiggle, wiggle, bonjour. Come on, everybody, wiggle, wiggle, bonjour. Bonjour, bonjour, bonjour. Rub your hands, namaste. Come on, everybody, rub your hands, namaste. Come on, everybody, rub your hands. Come on, everybody, rub your hands, namaste, namaste, namaste. One more time. Come on, everybody, rub your hands, namaste. Come on, everybody, rub your. Come on, everybody. Namaste, 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 namaste.
Thank you to our wonderful Wolf Trap Master Teaching Artists, Kofi Dennis and Valerie Bain Carroll, for getting us started this morning with greetings from across the world. How's that? Good morning, everyone. And welcome to Creativity Connects Arts and Early Learning. My name is Akua Kuyate Tate, and I'm the Vice President of Education at Wolf Trap Foundation for the Performing Arts. First, we would like to say thank you to Denver Center for the Performing Arts for allowing us to be in their space, for hosting us today, and for this in this really beautiful venue. So let's give them a hand, because we really appreciate that. So this morning, I want to take a few minutes to share with you about Creativity Connects and also about the focus for today. Creativity Connects Arts and Early Learning brings together community leaders in 5 diverse cities to spark dialogues about early learning through the arts. The project, funded from a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts, is being implemented in partnership between Wolf Trap Institute for Early Learning Through the Arts, that is the flagship education program from Wolf Trap Foundation for the Performing Arts, and the Institute for Child Success. And we will share more about our organizations and our programs later. The goal of Creativity Connects Arts and Early Learning is to convene key stakeholders in arts, education, business, social services, and philanthropy to facilitate meaningful conversations about the effectiveness of early childhood arts integration, and to foster the creation of actionable plans to incorporate arts in early learning childhood classrooms. We reached out to several of the members of the Denver arts and education communities to determine the focus for today's symposium, and together they identified today's theme, inclusive learning through the arts, which is considered to be a critical focus in the Denver area. We want to thank all of you who supported and guided the planning of today's session. Over the course of the day, we will share and explore strategies, best practices, and tools that we hope will inspire everyone in this room to continue to strengthen inclusive learning environments for Denver's youngest learners. When we speak about inclusive learning environments, we mean inclusivity in its broadest sense. We want to create productive learning environments for all children and their families, from varied social, economic, and cultural backgrounds, and encompassing all learning styles and needs. You're in for an exciting day. It's going to be really full with a lot of activity, so you're going to put your papers down real soon, okay? We'll share and you'll learn important information and content, along with engaging in arts integration experiences that support today's theme. This afternoon, you will have opportunities to engage further as you consider how the information and the content shared today might support your work here in Denver. Now, just a few quick housekeeping items. You can connect to the wireless network. You see this information on the screen here. So the username is Academy with a capital A, and also the password is Academy with a capital A 1718. I know that's important for many people. In the room next door where you picked up your registration materials, we have a table where there will be also a list of the attendees who are here today. There's also flyers and brochures from Denver-based organizations, and if any of you here have materials that you would like to share, you are welcome to put those materials on that table as well. We encourage you all to keep the conversation going during and after the symposium by using Twitter. You can follow Wolf Trap Institute at wolftrap_edu and use the hashtag #CCEarlyArts. We also are live streaming this morning on Facebook. So there's another opportunity to share what we're doing today. Now, to kick off our symposium, it's my pleasure to introduce the First Lady of Denver, the First Lady of Denver, Mary Louise Lee. Ms. Lee is a staunch supporter and advocate of the arts and arts education. Her commitment and contribution is especially significant for Denver's music and performing arts landscape. The First Lady's Bringing Back the Arts initiative works to expand access to Denver's cultural institutions and enhance arts programs in Denver schools. Ms. Lee also built a career on coaching and mentorship, making her the perfect person to kick off a day focused on the arts and early learning in Denver. We are truly honored that she has joined us this morning. Please join me in welcoming the First Lady of Denver, Mary Louise Lee. Thank you so much.
If you believe within your heart, you know that no one can change the path that you must go. Believe there's a reason to be. Believe you can make time stand still. From the moment that you try, if you believe that you will be there, believe in yourself right from the start. Believe in the magic that's inside of your heart. Believe all these things, not because I taught you to, no, but believe in yourself. If you believe in yourself, just believe in yourself as I believe in you. Thank you. Thank you. How many of you are from Denver? Oh, it's quite a bit. Okay. How many visitors do we have? Well, welcome to Denver. Welcome to Denver. And I'm glad to be here this morning. I want to thank Wolf Trap for inviting me to be here to speak to you today and to kick it off. And, you know, I got to tell you, as a performer myself, I'm not a morning person. But I got up extra early so I could make sure to to be able to sing one of my favorite songs, and a song that I sing to whenever I'm speaking to youth or adults. I always sing that song because that song has so much meaning to me. It is from The Wiz. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with that. And Glenda, the Good Witch, she sang that song. And I was so privileged to be able to perform in The Wiz a couple of times. And I was Glenda, the Good Witch. And so that song has always stuck with me. So that is my theme song that I always tend to sing all the time. So if you have heard me sing it before, it's like, this lady doesn't know any other songs. Early childhood education is the best investment we can make in our future generations. Investment results in more well-rounded and better educated adults and workforce. I've spent my career coaching and training vocalists and other artists, so I can appreciate the importance of the model of coaching in the professional development of educators. And I applaud each of you for taking the step to come to this event today to further your professional development. Programs that focus both on children and on their teachers are the models we should follow to ensure that our youngest children have the best educational opportunities possible and are set up for success. Using the performing arts enhance early learning is not only fun and engaging for students and teachers, but it's very effective. Wolf Trap Foundation for the Performing Arts is a nationally recognized leader in early childhood arts integrated learning. Now, the performing arts provide an opportunity to include children with special needs, dual language learners, and children with varied social, economic, and cultural backgrounds in meaningful, engaging ways. As it was spoken earlier, I do have a foundation called Bringing Back the Arts, and I'm very proud of our foundation of helping, enhancing, and providing access to our cultural institutions and to providing access to our local artists and things like that. And as a professional vocalist, actress, that moves well. Now, I'm not a dancer anymore after breaking my hip 5 years, but that's another day. Vocal coach, I'm a band leader. My arts education that I received in the Denver Public Schools helped me to use both sides of the brain and to be able to think outside of the box. You know, it's always said that arts people are very weird. I'll take that. From visual arts, choir, dance, drama, and band, it made me who I am today. And I am grateful for the wonderful arts educators who taught me. Mrs. McNeil, Mrs. McGowan, Mrs. Johnson, Mr. Music, Miss Bliss, Mrs. Gregory, Mrs. Fuller, Mrs. Hogel, Mr. Shanker, Mr. Nye, Mr. Erickson, Mrs. Fulkerson, Mr. McCullum, Mrs. Hartman, and Mr. Moody. I am a product of what arts integration is, and I'm very proud. I'm very proud to be here today, and I thank you all so much again for having me, and have a wonderful day. Remember to, oh, look, Siri says, I'm not sure what you said, but I didn't ask Siri anything. But anyway, have a wonderful day, and remember to believe in yourself. Thank you.
That's the best kickoff ever, right? Full of arts and education and inspiring words. Thank you so much, First Lady. We really appreciate you coming and taking the time to be with us this morning. Now I'd like to invite our two keynote speakers for today. Dr. Janice Grindal is a fellow at the Edward Ziegler Center at Yale University and a senior fellow with the Institute for Child Success. At the Edward Ziegler Center, Dr. Grindal supports the Mental Health Outreach for Mothers Partnership, an initiative for mothers with young children who have low incomes. Ms. Allison Logan is the Executive Director for Bridgeport Prospers, which serves 12 towns in Connecticut to mobilize communities to improve people's lives. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Janice Grindal and Allison Logan.
Good morning. Good morning. You have a great wiggle. I watched you. I watched you. Thank you for welcoming us. Allison and I have worked together for a couple years in this space, the brain science and the science of art, and we're thrilled to be a part of your gathering this morning. We are going to gallop through because if you let us, we would just take the whole morning, and we don't have the whole morning. So I'm going to do part one, and then Allison will do part two. I will tell you, just as a secret, she is an opera singer. This is her space, and an arts educator. So we're kind of a really good team for this one. I'm going to talk about the science of brain development. You could call it Neuroscience 101. So it's going to be a fast gallop, and we'll be here for a little bit if you want to talk about it some more. And you may have anything that is referenced on this for any work that you want to do in the space as we go forward. Okay. So it's pretty clear to us, you can click all three, that today in America we need the arts in our children's lives more than ever. Truth to power. Many children and families in America face incredible challenges. We have always faced challenges, but today they're at a really high pitch, and we feel it here, all of us, as well as here and in our bodies. So we envision, it's always helpful to start with where you want to be, right? Because otherwise any road will get you there, and it won't be where you expect. We envision an America where all children can grow up healthy, safe, smart, and strong. Agreed? We envision an America where all children can read proficiently in 3rd grade. Do you agree? Yes. We envision an America where a legacy of economic security and educational success passes from one generation to another. Do you agree? We agree that's where we're going, and we agree that we're not there yet. This next slide, so just wait 1 second to click, is very hard. These are real pictures. They're not photoshopped. They are us. They are from around the country. We live and work in a country facing increasing individual trauma and societal stress. 1, 2, 3. This is not okay. It's not okay. So to bring the brain science to us, we are using 3 buckets that the federal government and our state governments use to talk about child neglect. I'm a child welfare professional as well as a couple other things along the way. And they talk about 3 areas of challenge for all families, and that some families have more than this. Here's what's in those buckets. I'm not going to read them. You can read them. We all know somebody, including ourselves probably, who's been in that kind of stressful situation. And I'm going to talk for a minute around ACEs because we're all looking at this through a different lens, finally now, the lens of what we know about children's development in terms of their brains. But that's in everybody's story, and for some people, there's more. The other piece of this argument, well, it's not really an argument, assertion, is that the early years really matter. You can click the other one. It turns out that the more kinds of early adversity children have in the first 3 years, the greater their risk of developmental delays, real diagnosable IDA Part C developmental delays by the age of 3. And you can see as the types of adversity go up, so does that. This is our special ed problem, if we address it, and it involves many, many children. It also turns out that the delays in this part of a child's life are predictive of continued educational challenges and life challenges. We can remediate, but the brain is growing absolutely the fastest in these first 3 years, and this kind of adversity actually changes the structure and the function of a young child's brain. That is a stunning piece of science. We sort of knew it was important as parents. We knew it was hard as parents, but we didn't have the ability to look into a child's brain and actually see the parts of the brain that were firing and the parts that weren't, and the parts that were firing when maybe they might not have been, that caused children to have challenges in learning, have challenges in their social emotional development. We also know, and this is new and incredibly important, that living with trauma and toxic stress, especially when you're young because your brain is growing the fastest, but for the rest of us, it changes the biology of our bodies. It changes the body chemicals that are predominant in our bodies, and it can be passed from one generation to another. It doesn't change our genes, it changes the switches that release various kinds of body hormones. So the important takeaway here is the early years really matter. The early years, if in challenge, predict later kinds of challenges, and that we can pass that down to the next generation. What that says to me is we got to be in the space together, guys. So we're happy to be in the space with you. Would you click? Here's another way to think about the impacts of children living with ACEs. ACEs are a set of 10 adversities that were identified in 1997. So we're a little slow on the uptake here as part of the ACEs study. How many of you have seen the documentary Resilience? Oh, good. Then you have work to do that we could do together. I commend you, I implore you, please look at that because it puts this work in context, in science context, in heart. It is called Resilience, the documentary. Children living with those 10 kinds of challenges: physical, emotional, sexual abuse, physical and emotional neglect, a family dysfunction where an adults may be going through an acrimonious divorce, or where someone has been incarcerated, where an adult has mental health kind of challenges, including maternal depression, and where there's substance addiction in a family. That's lots of people, right? Some of us in our own families. When children live in that kind of a context, especially when they're really little, these are the other things that happen. And this is what our schools see and our families see. Take a look. So if we want to change the life trajectory of our children and our country and your city, we need to be early. We need to remove the stressors. It's like getting rid of lead exposure, right? We don't keep kids in houses where they're exposed to lead. We need to reduce the dose of this adversity, and we need to do it together. We're going to argue that the arts is one way to do that, but that's what the brain science tells us, and is unequivocally clear. It is absolutely the truth. Could you click? We needed a way to talk about brain science, which is kind of a scary topic, in one slide. And this is it. So we invented this, and it gets better every time we engage with folks like you because they help us make it richer. I'm going to walk you through here, and then I'm almost done with my piece. The yellow sunbursts are good things. The blues are not so good. The first two bullets are everybody things, universal things that touch all of us. The beginning sunburst tells us what our brain is about. It tells us that our emotional self and our cognitive self and our language self are all intertwined in our brain. The notion that there is very compartmentalized and one piece doesn't impact another, that's not right anymore in the science. And the neurons which connect them are called synapses, and that grows really fast in the first 3 years. So that interconnected cognitive and emotional development tells us that what happens to a child in terms of their experience, their social, emotional, the nurturing relationship they have or don't have really impacts on the cognitive part of their brain as well. So if you're working with social emotional learning, SEL, this is the space. I predict for you as a child development person that's going to be as important as third grade reading, because it presents the barriers that we need to work through for children to learn anything in the kind of society we want. We're looking at executive function really closely. That's the ability to organize your life. You used it to get here this morning. Families with challenges who can manage, and we say they're not doing very well, but they can manage to get on 3 separate buses to get to our social services offices to pick up their check. When their child's daycare is across town, and we wonder why they're late, they're using incredible executive function to manage those steps. So we need to rethink what's an asset and what's a deficit. Self-regulation is huge. When I talk to kindergarten teachers and I say, what do we need? They say, don't worry about the ABCs, we know how to teach that. What we need is less wiggling. We need more ability for children to begin to regulate their behaviors. Now, 4-year-olds are 4-year-olds, right? We've all had them, and 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds. But children who live in adversity don't have the same pace of self-regulatory development as children who don't. And we see that in our classrooms. You may see it in the classes that you teach. Empathy. This is a big one for me. We know that 2-year-olds begin to show empathy. So I want to know what we did that we don't have that capacity now. What did we do after 2 that has allowed us to be who we are in the world we're in? Because kids are wired to do that stuff. And lastly, we're looking at body and mind together. That used to be hokey. The science says, you know what? Those of you who've been saying it, you've been right all along, and it has to do with your brain and how your brain's body chemicals work. So that's all the good stuff. That's the everything stuff. That's what we want for ourselves and we want for our children. The mediator in that is the parent-child relationship, because that's this connector That's why that picture up there of the baby on the shoulder, it's this tight space and we're wired to be in it unless we undo it in our development. This stuff here, trauma, toxic stress, adversity, we all experience it. It's not good. And early in children's lives, it diverts their developmental course. But those are everybody things. The next one, this is the pile-on stuff. And when Allison and I started talking, using this particular slide, maybe a year ago, we had these two reversed. So we would get up and talk about poverty and racism and inequity and all those things that we worry about in a social justice context, and we kept losing people. Because people are inclined to say, well, that's those folks over there. That's not me. I'm a doc. They're not my practice. What we realized is the way to understand this is that we all experience adversity, and that impacts on our development. And some of us have extra pile-on. And when that happens, we have a special obligation to be changing the context of those children's lives. So the reverse of those tells a very different story, and it doesn't let us push away from each other in ways that we are now inclined to do. The last yellow dot, that's where we're going. It's not enough to know about adversity. It's not enough to do an ACEs screen. We have to do something with this knowledge. And where we are going, I would say, is back to the future. It has two sides. Inside of us, it's all the work with early children in mindfulness and centering and breathing and space and the arts. And it moves through self-control and kindness. Last year, the Pope did an epistle on tenderness. He said, it's time. This is the part of the brain where the body chemicals create a very positive, nurturing flow in our bodies, and we're wired to have that, and the arts bring that out. That's where we're going. And at the bottom is the notion of resilience. Resilience means what? Strength in the face of adversity, right? But resilience is not grit. It's not grit. I'm a military widow. I had breast cancer. We lost a grandson. I have a lot of grit. The only way I got through that was with a group, a network, social engagements, a nurturing set of people around us. That's resilience. We're not born with it. We have to build it. So the connectedness of us, community in a very personal way, is what helps us get through that stuff. We need grit, but grit won't do it alone. So this is our trajectory. This is where we're going. The arts help us to get there, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. Could you click for me? So the two takeaway messages: the early years really, really, really matter. And the second one, we can build health and we can build resilience, even if the families we're working with don't seem to have it now. That's a skill and a knowledge and an obligation that we have. Could you click? And I will turn this over to Allison.
Good morning, everybody. Oh, do I have to turn this on? Is it on? Okay, now it's on. I don't have a lanyard like Janice has. So a little bit about myself. I'm executive director of Bridgeport Prospers, which is a collective impact movement, cradle to career in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Very high need city in the state of Connecticut. But that's not where I started. Everybody asks me, how did I get here and how am I doing the work that I did? I started as an opera singer. I started in the arts. Opera and music and playing the piano and everything I had to do with music helped me get through a very difficult childhood. I have a very high ACE score, and it was my savior. It's how I got to where I am today. And I owe everything to the arts. I owe everything to my experience in the arts and then teaching in the arts. I was a music teacher at a very, very small elementary school in Middlefield, Connecticut, and it was a hot school. Some of you probably know what that is, right? It's a higher ordered thinking school. It was an arts integrated school. I'm very fond of Wolf Trap. Wolf Trap artists used to come to the school and do residencies in the school. So it's when Janice asked me to come do this, I said, yes, even though I was flying from Seattle and from LA to here, because I said, this means the world to me. And so at that little school, I actually worked more with the classroom teachers than in my own music classroom. Because what I found is when I saw children coming into my music room, there were several children who did not have steady beat. I was shocked at how many kids coming in did not have the skill of keeping a steady beat. So when I went to the classroom teachers, I said, little Johnny and little Sarah, I kind of named off to the classroom teacher. She goes, you know what? Those are my lowest performing readers, my lowest performing students on any kind of task, the ones who can't sit still, the ones who are, all over the classroom, the ones who are going down to the office and getting in trouble, poking other kids. And I said, well, that's interesting. So I did a little self-study. In all of my classrooms in that school, I tallied the children who had difficulty keeping a steady beat. And guess what? What do you think happened? They were all the low performers in those classrooms. So I created a curriculum. I wrote a curriculum to use the arts to help teach reading skills, math skills, and integrated it into the classroom in a way where the children really were able to listen and attend better. And I just have to say, it was called Hot Readers. And that pull-out group in 9 months were on level with their peers in their classroom. And I'll tell you a little bit about how I did that later. But that's a little bit about me and why I'm here. That's a picture of my son when he was 5 going into kindergarten. He just walked through his college door this year as a master tuba player. He's the top level tuba player in the entire state of Connecticut and on a scholarship for playing tuba. So the arts were really a part of him as well. And that started when he was in my belly. I sang, I had earphones on, I danced, I rocked because I knew the rocking would actually start that acquisition of steady beat. So that started in utero. But the brown bear, by the time he left for school, I actually counted up when I looked in his box of books how many of the copies of this book I had. I had it in soft cover. I had it in board book. I had it in big. I had it because it was his favorite story of all time. And if you think about why, so let's think about why that was his favorite story of all time. Think about the repetition. Okay, so this side of the group here, you're going to clap the question on your hand, and you're going to do the answer, because we all know it. Here we go. Ready, here we go. That's why. That innate sense of rhythm and that innate sense of pattern that goes all through the book. I tried every other book, and no, every night it was this book. And let me tell you, but you know what it ended up doing for me? It ended up helping me use literature in my teaching in my music classes. That's what I actually did. And I actually took the vocabulary from children's books and built rhythm patterns. And that's how I taught my music classes. Because it really taught me that literature, the literature that children love and know, really can be used to teach through and teach in the arts. Seeking patterns. Part of what makes us human is the need for our brains to search for that meaning. You as educators can create learning opportunities that honor that reality. Children who are given complex patterns to discover and interpret send their brains on this important search for meaning. My son, his brain was seeking that pattern and seeking that meaning. At the same time, children are building connections so vital to higher learning and critical thinking skills. Patterns are observations organized into meaningful categories by the observer. When young children seek patterns in the world around them, they see order instead of chaos, which builds confidence in their understanding of how the world works and gives them the feeling of control and safety. Think about a young child coming to school with everything that Janice just talked about. High A scores, high trauma, high stress. What does their life feel like? Chaos. Patterns. Seeking patterns. That's comforting to children. Routines are comforting to children. Patterns. Familiarity is comforting to children. Everything you do in the arts, why do you think the kids, if you're a music teacher, they come into your classroom, they ask you for the same song all the time, right? And they want to do the same dance over and over and over. And they want to work with clay 57,000 times every time they're in your classroom because familiarity is safety. Patterns are safety. The arts provide a perfect vehicle for neural development. Perfect. Let's think about some patterns. There are visual patterns, lines, colors, shapes, and symmetry. Do you notice children go to things that have patterns? Their eyes actually follow things more that have patterns than abstract art because their brain is seeking that pattern. There are kinesthetic patterns. By the way, when I used to do this work and I used to write grants, I didn't say the arts, even though that's exactly what I meant. I said visual, kinesthetic, auditory, and linguistic. Because it's the same thing, but somehow, for grant purposes, those others sound better for whatever reason. So there are kinesthetic patterns in movement, steady beat, rhythmic patterns, isolated, structured, and sequence. Kids often don't get that now. They're inside the house, right? They're in walkers. They don't get to crawl and explore and do all those gross motor movements. There are auditory patterns, steady beat, rhythmic, pitch and tonal patterns, motifs, and dynamics. Kids seek that. If there's a song that you do with them that goes from slow to fast, they can't wait for that. They can't wait for it to get fast. And then linguistic patterns, I call this drama. So there are speech patterns, action and reaction, rhyme, intonation, and conversation. You just had a conversation right here, right? And I didn't even say anything. You had a conversation when I first came up and said no words up here. You had a conversation. So there are patterns everywhere in the arts. Children love them. That's why they're so happy when they see you and you're doing a song or a dance because that's what they crave. And all of this builds safety, a sense of self, and strong neural connections. The arts provide a vehicle for brain healing. So there was a study that was done that showed how, and the link is down there, Dr. Bruce Perry. It's the Civitas Healing Project. So when you get this PowerPoint, you can click right on it. It will go right to there. Okay. So it showed that the brain is specifically wired to respond to certain art strategies. So the base of the brain and the brainstem responds to touch. So anything you're doing, a dance where kids are touching hands or clapping hands, hand clap patterns, all of that, the base of the brain responds to that. The midbrain responds to music making and movement. The limbic region responds to dance, art, play, therapy, and natural discovery. Having kids go out in nature and take things in nature and create a piece of art with that. The cortical region responds to art, storytelling, drama, and writing. So there is science that now tells you that your brain, the children's brains, and your brain actually develops and grows and makes neural connections when you are engaged in the arts. So that's an amazing study, so go on that. The arts provide a vehicle for inclusion. I'll just let you read that quote. It's a great quote. I want to tell you a story when I was teaching. I had a student, her name was Sarah. She was nonverbal. She did not interact with anybody. She did not make eye contact with anybody. Her teachers, her classmates. She had a little machine that if she needed to go to the bathroom, she would touch a picture on there. If she needed something, she was able to tell what she needed, but she was not able to interact. I held a special class on my prep time for Sarah and the other special ed students in the school. We used to sing and dance, even she would watch. We would sing and dance 3 to 4 times a week. About halfway through the school year, I think it was about 6 months in, we were singing, and you probably know this. Bow, wow, wow, whose dog art thou? Little Tommy Wicker's dog, bow, bow, wow. And there was a dance that went with it. The kids loved it. We did it over and over. This one particular day, Sarah came in. we were doing that song and dance. And it's a dance where you have to grab a child's hands and you have to spin with them and then turn around. In the middle of the song, she reached like this. And she reached to a girl that was one of her classmates right in front of her. It was the first time everybody started crying in the room. It was the first time ever she had interaction, and we kept doing it and doing it. By the end of the school year, she was able to do that dance with partners in the classroom. So the arts are a way of inclusion. There was another little boy, his name was Eric. He did not have a developed corpus callosum in his brain. So he was not sending signals from one hemisphere of his brain to the other. He could not do two things at once. So if he was doing one thing, he was focused on that one thing. He had no verbal communication. His favorite song was Little Speckled Frog, and that's the 5, and you count down from 5 to 1. By the end of the year, he was able to walk and play the drum beat and actually count down from 5 to 1 with that song. 3 different activities all at once. It helped develop the strength of his corpus callosum, because when you're doing arts activities, you're engaging all of your brain at the same time. The arts provide a vehicle for equity. Think about the activity I did with you this morning, the first activity. Did I use speech at all? Did you have to have a special instrument? Did you have to have anything special to do that? Were you a part of a group? Yes. So the arts bypass language. They bypass socioeconomic status. They bypass children who are coming to school feeling unsafe and with trauma, and children who do feel safe. They bypass all of that. The arts are a huge vehicle for learning. I would not be standing here speaking to you today if they weren't a part of my life. So I want to end like we began. However, I'm going to give you instructions this time. We're going to do the same activity, but this time I want you to feel free to do some improvisation. Use vocal sounds if you would like. They can be tonal sounds. They can be rhythmic sounds. They can be a melody. But what I really want you to do is listen. If your neighbor behind you is doing something really cool, you do it too. And it's okay, right? It's okay to take each other's ideas. That's what improvisation is all about. And I want to see what we come up with. You ready? We're just going to be very organic. You're going to have the same part you had last time. Let me grab the mic. Hold on. Let me ask. Oh, groovy. Oh, there you go.
23 years ago, I had a traumatic brain injury and was in a coma, and all my damage was in my frontal cortex. And a year later, I started swing dancing, and like everything started coming together for me. And then I've had many students who I've worked with through that. Anyway, I just wanted to share, like, you really moved me a few times. Thank you.
And I think, you know, a piece of this is because my own trauma and what music did for me. I recognized it. If you're working with children and you're recognizing that, making sure that they're involved in as many arts experiences as possible is just very, very crucial.
Could I add a word to that too? In addition to all of this that we've talked about, the brain work on early childhood and later adulthood, I put myself in the darn latter category. We don't want to miss the touch part of this. We don't want to miss the sort of, I need to be in your space right here. Look where my hands are. We need, and education tells us not to do that. It tells us don't get in somebody else's space. It tells us don't hold and touch and feel. This opens that door, and touch makes brain development too. So Allison's choice in this, I think, was stunning because it's the whole package.
I'm wondering, since you are both from Connecticut, if you had participated in the Hot Schools conferences, and if you know about anything like that happening elsewhere in the country, and even if they're still doing it. I don't know if they're doing it anymore.
They are still doing it, and I was actually a master trainer for the Hot Schools. I traveled around and trained for them. There are Hot Schools that are still in existence. They're not as big of a, they actually moved to the state agency that the Hot Schools were in, and so it's not as big of a movement as it used to be, but Hot School still does exist, and I can actually, if you give me your information, I can actually put you in contact. I'm very good friends with the executive director of Hot Schools, and I'm not sure if the Higher Order Thinking Schools has traveled across the country or not, but Denver, I'm sure, has some sort of arts integrated schools or, you know, something like that. But I can put you in direct contact with her, okay?
The conference that they did was so powerful, and was sort of that immersive experience over multiple days for teachers. I just don't know if anyone else doing that kind of work.
And that's really interesting because, you know, I do, the workshop that I used to do there was called Learning in the Arts and Through the Arts, and how they're two completely different things. And for teachers, sometimes they get very afraid, and they say they're not an artist. And they can't do arts because they're not an artist. What I teach them is everybody knows how to draw lines, right? I used to give them a toolbox. It was actually something that stuck right on their board, popsicle sticks. And it had things like statues, line dance, mural. It had things like arts activities that no matter what they were teaching, they would just pick a stick, and they didn't have to plan for it. They just, if they were reading a story and they picked the statue stick, they would make statues of the characters. Or they would do dialogue, questions and answers of the two characters in the book. So I made it very accessible for teachers. That's something I think is really crucial, because I think if teachers feel like they have to plan another thing or do another thing, or if they don't feel like an artist, sometimes that they struggle. But arts integration is crucial, and that's what I spent the majority of my career doing.
I want to add one thing onto that, too, that speaks to the world we're in and the hot topics that allow us to get to this space, even if we don't call it the arts. The brain science and the ACEs work in learning to be trauma-informed, which is a way of being with each other. There are all kinds of clinical programs, but it's really a way of being with each other that is different. And what we're finding is that schools and other places are beginning to understand that children in classrooms many times are struggling. And in fact, it has to do with trauma in their lives, or ACEs in their lives, parental stressors in their lives, or the absence of parents in their lives, even if they're there. And so what we see is the opportunity to ride on the wings of this trauma-informed movement, because it's happening in all of our schools, and take it back to the venue and the experiences that let those two be married. So remember the storybook? That was a 6-year-old in the city of Bridgeport. If that doesn't move you, I mean, I have to fight off the tears on that one every time I do it. So what is that? That's that child's story. It's also her art. It's her life. And that is exactly at the intersect of where some children are today, and all children are at some point. And this kind of experience that Allison has been talking about, and it can be spontaneous, and it's about the relationship that you have and other people have with those kids, and it's all about their brains.
So there's this really great book that talks about trauma-informed care called The Body Keeps the Score, which you probably know. And it was very enlightening when I read it, but what I see is there's this expectation that there's this one-size-fits-all model, which doesn't work for kids. But then it comes down to money and time. So can you talk a little bit about how we help kids using trauma-informed care without damaging them further, and without it being like throw spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks? I mean, how does it all come together?
All right, I'll start and you finish. Okay, so to do trauma-informed work in classrooms and other settings and in your homes doesn't take a lot of money. There are interventions, and we have to train to them, and they can be expensive, especially special ed interventions. But the notion of being trauma-informed is a useful, universal construct, and honestly, it has to do with who you are in the space with that child. So what it's causing us to do is rearrange the DNA of our schools, because we've not let ourselves be in that space, and it's hard if you have 30 kids. I'm working with a school in Charlotte where we showed the movie Resilience, so again, somebody here's got to screen it, and you need to come. And a teacher raised their hand, because when children have ACEs, they have all those behavior challenges that you saw. And she said, well, what do you do if you cut? This was, it was like one of these, right? So, before they ever opened their mouth, that was going to be hard, and she was angry. And the question was, what do you do when half the kids are like that? It wasn't my job to answer her, because the school district was there. It was their job to answer her. But I asked how many teachers in that school felt that they had that number of children, half the kids. And most of the teachers raised their hands. So that tells you something to begin with. And then what we talked about was that the teachers, had a backpack of their own, right? Kids come with a backpack, it's all that experience. But teachers, and you have backpacks too. And so the conversation we had was really pretty straightforward about trauma-informed care. It goes like this. What's in your backpack? Your backpack. What's your life experience? What happened to you? What do you need? That is a trauma-informed conversation between me, in that case, and adults. But it's the same conversation that we need to learn to have. And I would argue, and I think Allison would agree, that it doesn't have to just be with our mouth. I mean, evidence of using the arts allows children to express that voice piece that's hard otherwise. So do I think that you need money? Sometimes, yeah, it's good to get trained, but it's not about clinical interventions all the time. It is about the way we are and how we evidence what we now know about children's brains and their development and what's in our backpack.
And I think, just to very quickly add to that, I think, Janice and I have been working really hard in Bridgeport at creating a bundled approach to our prenatal to 3 work, which is, yes, you need to have evidence-based programs, right? There needs to be clinical intervention, right? And there needs to be like circle of security and whatever programs that really are trauma-informed programs. But you also need, like Janice said, you need to have the universal approach. You need to have the light touch approaches. This is a perfect avenue to do that. So if all teachers were trained to be able to create a classroom culture that invited the arts, invited sharing, invited kindness, if all teachers were trained in how to do that, there are some kids who just need a little support. There are some kids who just need a little love and interaction. There are some kids who, if you did arts activities during the day, that's what they would need to feel safe. So I think it's a yes and. So I think, doing some light touch things as well as those clinical interventions are crucial. In Bridgeport right now, the school district is, they're training they've done a resilience training. They're training all of their teachers in evidence-based trauma-informed practices. But then we are also, through the community, we're also rolling resilience out through the community to touch not only the kids in school, but the kids when they go to their pediatrician's office, that they're getting information there, that that everybody in the community has this sense of being trauma informed. So I think it's a yes and. It's a yes.
There's a line in this will be my last word, I promise, although Joe knows I can't do that, so I shouldn't promise because I always break it. There's a line in there are many stunning lines in this documentary, but one is a woman who participates in a process of learning about this, and she stands up in Columbus, Ohio in 2015 with a group of 400 people who look just like us, sort of people with education, people with a background, sort of more professional audience. And they talk with her afterwards. She didn't know about ACEs, and of course she discovered she had some ACEs, as we all do. And the one line that is so stunning to me, because it applies to children and us as professionals and us as families, is that we are the sum of our life experiences. Children are the sum of their life experiences. They may have lots of experiences, but they haven't lived it as long as we have. So this work lets us together to understand the sum of our life experiences and the natural, humane, body-engaging, heart-engaging potential that the arts in all of its forms can bring to the worlds, the closed worlds that we live in, the worlds of our families, and the worlds of our kids. Thank you.
It's really great.
Let's thank Dr. Grindal and Ms. Logan again. That was really great information. Know that they'll be around pretty much today, I believe so, throughout the day. And as they said, there's a wealth of knowledge and information and experience that's right here in this room, and we hope to share some of that throughout the day. So thanks again for letting us be a part of that. Right now, we're going to have our Wolf Trap Master Teaching Artist, Kofi Dennis, to share an experience with you. Kofi is going to share a traditional Ghanaian call and response experience that he's adapted to use with young children. Kofi is a master teaching artist and a professional percussionist and storyteller, and he conducts arts integration classroom residencies and professional development workshops in music and creative drama. He's part of a duo called Nasi Drama, Groma, which is presents performances of and teaching about traditional African music, drums, and rhythms and storytelling. And he uses his art form to work across numerous environments, learning environments with both adults and children. And so Kofi has studied at the University of Ghana and also at the Comenda College at University of Cape Coast in the arts, as well as in early childhood and adolescence development. So right now, you're going to be engaged. You can put your papers down. I know that's going to happen. Put your things out in your lap, and let's welcome Kofi up to the front. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ekua. Thank you, Ekua. My turn, and then your turn. See, call and response has been the hallmark of communication for traditional cultures throughout the world. And as a master teaching artist, I've seen and experienced teachers use call and response in various ways in their classrooms, throughout their classroom routines. It could be verbal, it could be non-verbal, but it's my turn and then your turn. Some use it as echo, but otherwise, I say one thing, you may say another thing. Hello, you know what? Well, you are echoing me, but if you're answering the question, I say, you know what? Right? So I ask you a question, you ask a question back, but it's a call and response. Your response is a question. I'm here to share with you this call and response that I lived with growing up in Ghana, in West Africa. Among the Akans and the people of Ghana, if anyone tells you, I'll go, right? The meaning is, may I have your attention, please? Are you paying attention? It is used situationally. So your response is, Ame. right? That's your response. That means you have given me your attention. Oh, yes, I'm paying attention. I'm listening. So situationally, so if I say I go in the sense that, may I be excused? And then you say, I may, oh yeah, sure, right? Sometimes how the leader calls is how you respond with the tone. So if I shout it, I go. But if I whisper, I go. It could be in a general meeting, it's a social meeting, and everybody is talking, and the leader comes up and says, I go. We're singing it, right? But then once we understand what it means, it's easy. Because all I want is your attention. And you have given me. When it's, may I have it, please? It's like you are asking for it. And politely you give it. Right? You are modeling, that courtesy of, may I have your attention, please? And then you give it. And as the speakers before me have said, I put together a series of sequence of actions that would encompass the whole thing, the holistic thing. So movement, verbal, and everything else, right, within this. As I said, it's used situationally. So what I put together is the four movements or 4 actions. So first one, I say, I go, you respond, I may. We count it 4 times. After that, we clap our hands 4 times. After that, we tap our shoulders 4 times. After that, we stretch our body to the sides 4 times with a sound, ooh. And then finally, we make 2 big circles. 1 circle going up, 1 circle coming down. Let's go through this and then we explain. So I say, I go, you say, amen. I go. I go. I go. I go. Time to clap. 1, 2, 3, 4. Tap your shoulders. 1, 2, 3, 4. We blow some air. You stretch your body with a sound. Ooh, 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 ooh. Then 2 big circles. 1 big circle here and 1 big circle down. In the first circle, the sound we make is from grandpa's voice to baby's voice. Let's try that. Ah, and then we say the word umoja. Umoja. It's a Kiswahili word that means oneness, unity. When you're counting in Kiswahili, number 1 is umoja, the number 2 imbiri, and so forth, right? So the holiday celebration of Kwanzaa for African Americans, they use Kiswahili mostly in most of the terms. But they have the 7 principles. 7 is Saba. 7 in Kiswahili is Saba. So the 7 principles, Nguzo Saba, right? For that. So thanks for reminding me. So anyway, now we have all of this. Let's see if we can put it all together, okay? But guess what? Steady beat is important through call and response. It's an element of music. The call and response itself is an element of music. Steady beat is an element of music. But if we employ steady beat and then add a rhythm to it, it makes it so beautiful. Val will help me with some drum steady beat right there. So here we go. Let's. I say I go. You say amen. I go. I go. I go. I go. Time to clap. 1, 2. Tap your shoulders. 1. Blow some air. Blow some. Ooh, ooh. Ah, yee. Umoja. how would a special need child do this? How would they be able to do that? You don't have to do 4. You can do 2. You can do 1. The important is the eye contact and allowing them to imitate. So, I go. Can do that, right? Sometimes the little ones can't cross. So again, it's up to you to do this, right? And then, ooh, ooh, aye, moja. So please, let's stand up and then let's do this all together. So as you can see, you can vary it any way you want, right? Any way you want. But now we're going to go a little faster. Val, you ready? Steady beats. You have it. I have it. Right? Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. I go. I go. I go. I go. Time to clap. Tap your shoulders. Blow some air. Time to stretch. Ooh, 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 ooh. Aye. Moja. Thank you.
Throughout the day, you'll get an experience that you can take back home and adapt it for yourself, right? Thank you so much, Kofi. That's really great. So at this point, we want to, I'm getting my notes all mixed up. Here we go. We want to now transition to our panel discussion. And so I'd like to welcome our panel and the moderator to the stage, and we're going to be setting up right this time as I'm introducing them. And of course, like we did before, we'll have time for you to ask questions in the end. We'll make sure you have plenty of time for that. First, I'd like to introduce our panel moderator, Dr. Jane Bess. And Jane is the director of the Arts Education Partnership, or AEP, at Education Commissions of the States, which is based right here in Denver, Colorado. AEP is a national coalition of more than 100 education, arts, business, cultural, government, and philanthropic organizations dedicated to advancing the arts in education through research, policy, and practice. Dr. Bess has extensive experience working among practitioners, policymakers, and researchers. She previously held leadership positions at Learning Point Associates, that's now American Institutes for Research, and the National Conference of State Legislators. Jane teaches graduate courses on public policy and ethics at the University of Colorado School of Public Affairs, and she holds a BA from Indiana University, an MA from Ohio State, and the PhD from Vanderbilt University. Please help me welcome Dr. Jane Bess.
Is this on? You can hear me? Okay. This is a treat to be here today, and I'm so grateful to be doing this in Denver. As Akua mentioned, I work at the Arts Education Partnership, which is a national organization. And so I spend a lot of time back and forth to Washington, D.C., because we are funded by the U.S. Department of Education and the National Endowment for the Arts. So in the interest of time, I encourage you to take a look at our website, aep-arts.org, if you're unfamiliar with us, because we have a lot of terrific resources, research and policy information, and we do things like brag about our terrific partners such as Wolf Trap. And so it's fun for me to bring and welcome Wolf Trap to Denver, and at the same time spend a little time in my home city getting to know this panel of experts, because these are the people that are doing the boots on the ground work and are able to really talk about the important early childhood and creativity work that is happening. So I asked each of my panelists to introduce themselves by just simply telling their name and the organization of which they represent. And then we're going to dig into some questions. We're going to try to be mindful of our time and leave time for you to ask us some questions. And I also should remind you that we are Facebook Live, and Wolf Trap is encouraging social media usage. So please feel free to tweet and follow on Facebook Live. But with that, I'd like my terrific group of panelists to just introduce themselves, and then we'll dig into the questions. If you want to know more about them, their bios are in the program.
Hi, my name is Shelby Jarris, and I'm from Cleo Parker Robinson Dance.
I'm Christina Badhand. I'm Chichangu Lakota and Cherokee, and I'm from Jeffco Indian Education.
Tatiana Navas Nieves, Director of Cultural Affairs for the City and County of Denver.
Hi, Jennifer Stedron, Early Milestones, Colorado.
Okay, so a little reveal for you all. We all got on the phone in advance and kind of pre-cooked some of these questions. The group among here has taken a stab at telling me which questions they would like to answer. So that being said, we're going to get underway with the first set of questions going to Christina and Tariana, and all of these questions focus around the important work happening in inclusivity, accessibility, and important areas of professional development. So with that, Christina and Tariana, I'm going to ask you, what should we be considering when having conversations about inclusivity and learning, as it is a part of an integral part of school climate and culture? And I'll let either one of you duke it out to answer first.
I would say in terms of considering inclusivity for the Native community, one of the main things to consider is while it is a Native community, there's actually many communities within that. There are 573 federally recognized tribes in this country, and while they all are very similar and they are all the same similar cultural beliefs, they also are very different in their languages, and some of their cultural beliefs do differentiate in terms of like body language. So eye contact could be an insult to some. So when you're looking at some of our youth in schools, if say a principal is talking to them and they won't look them in the eye, sometimes the principal takes that as, you know, they're looking down, they're showing submissiveness, and they're not responsive. So they're not actually listening to them. But for that student, that culture, it's rude to look an adult in the eye. So they are trying to be respectful to that principal. So those are things to kind of keep in mind for our Native communities, especially our long hair too. I know in our community in Jeffco, we've had some issue with teachers and principals thinking that long hair means you're a delinquent, but for Natives, it is your history, it is your memory, it is very sacred. So to have a teacher tell you you need to cut your hair, and we'd even had some teachers give a like a certificate to a haircut place and just give it to the student without even really realizing, thinking that they were helping. But those are little microaggressions that can really damage a student and their experience at that school.
Terrific. Tariana?
So I guess I'm going to take a little different approach that I think as adults, I think to begin with it's important to recognize the context that, you know, we have a rapidly changing world, changing demographic, that soon we will become one of the most racially diverse nations in the world, and that we are also full of racial tension. So with that in mind, I think is often I don't feel that we as adults or children are equipped to navigate a world that is has a multiracial, pluralistic society. And I would strongly recommend, I want to make sure I don't forget this, for you to read. This is a great book, which you may all be aware of, by Jennifer Harvey, Raising White Kids in a Racially Unjust America. This is an incredible book for parents, teachers, grandparents, the village that is part of your child's growth. And I think what's important is that, especially when you're working with kids, she goes into how we are all the same. You know, that has failed. That concept of we're all equal, that truly has failed in us raising kids that are going to become empathetic adults, and how children, I mean, prejudice is learned, but kids notice differences in skin color and in hair, and before they're able to articulate those differences. And what we find as adults is that we don't want to have those conversations. And early on, they can understand that we all have the same worth, but we're not all treated equally. So I think for kids that are, kids, and I'm focusing on race, but I think as long as you treat that, it obviously benefits all. I have a son with a disability, and I think as long as you target that piece, we can all benefit. But the idea that how do you equip them to have those conversations? Because talking about race makes people uncomfortable, but if we don't have the conversation, then we're not going to address it. So I think it's shifting from, we're all the same, to actually noticing differences, to celebrating differences, and focusing on and having those conversations. And I think as kids, especially when you have kids of color versus white kids, I think it's important there's no special age, but it's important to start navigating the role that white people have in the structural racist environment that we navigate, because that creates empathy, and that creates a space where actually kids can connect. Kids notice and are much more articulate about experiencing recognition and celebrating differences. It's us, the adults, that actually change that, and we don't want to, don't say that, So we want to raise kids that are not just not racist, but that are equipped to be anti-racist and advocate for a just society.
Very good. So, Shelby, turning to you, many times, and I'm sure a lot of people out in the audience would agree, when we think about the arts and we think about the challenges associated with the arts, many times we think of lack of resources to do the things we like to do. So how do we, in your opinion, how do we make arts accessible to all early learners? And why is it important to prioritize it in terms of resource allocation? And what's being done to support children from the most under-resourced areas of Denver?
Great. We need to invest in teacher training. Being a previous teacher and being someone that has trained teachers, I've noticed that teachers are really concerned about trying to teach something that they know nothing about. That's scary for them. So being able to pack their toolbox with things that they can use. And I found that the easiest way to do that is introduce them to the elements of the different art forms. Things like line, pathways, shapes, body shapes, levels, all of those things people are aware of and understand and can speak intelligently about and feel like they can pass that on to their students. So offering that vocabulary is really important. I think providing grants for arts integration and arts education is super important as well, because we know that the budgets of the schools right now are not prioritizing the arts. And if we don't bring the arts into the classroom, the underserved students of Denver and around the world are the people that are missing out on this educational opportunity. They don't have the funding in which to go after that type of education outside of the classroom setting where it's going to cost them money to do so. And I'm happy to say that there are arts organizations in Denver that do offer scholarships for students after school and during school time, thanks to funding from places like SCFD, Science Cultural Facilities Districts, thank you, that provide monies for organizations like my own to go out and serve students that don't normally get access to the arts. A lot of us probably already know why the arts are important, but a couple of things that I've listed here are they help learn tolerance. A good thing that they help learn too is the understanding that things are not just black and white. There's gray areas, and the arts do that really well. They help develop higher order thinking skills. So we're talking about creating, evaluating, and synthesizing information as opposed to just rote memorization. They keep kids engaged and interested in school. They do all those other things too, like problem solving, perseverance, passion, all of the things that we've heard over and over and over again. A lot of us already know those things: teamwork, collaboration. And then some of the things that are being worked on in the Denver area for under-resourced areas. I know that my organization, Cleo Parker Robinson Dance, as part of their mission for the last 48 years is to provide arts education for those students that can't get art education otherwise. Like I said, we offer scholarships to our academy, and we offer free dance classes within the community as well. Organizations that provide funding specifically to the far northeast, because that's an area that also is not getting the resources that they need, including building great communities. GES, which is a work group that I'm involved in Globeville, I'm going to mess Ilaria Swansea, thank you. United Way has brought together a work group to help bring resources to those students in those schools, including arts education. And the last thing I want to say before I move on is that Colorado's Achievement Plan for Kids was passed in 2010, and I'm going to read part of that. The opportunity to study and build skills in the visual and performing arts increases self-confidence, nurtures students' creativity and curiosity, provides ongoing challenges for students, helps students remain engaged in school, facilitates building positive relationships between students and teachers, and as a result of these effects, helps reduce the school dropout rate.
Terrific. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to dig into the classroom level very soon, but I want to stay at the Denver community level for just a minute. And I'm going to take this back to you, Christina and Tariana, and ask you about what role can the arts play as a champion for cultural responsiveness, and why is it important in particular in Denver?
I think it's important because, as I mentioned, there's 573 federally recognized tribes, and in Denver there's thousands and thousands of Native students and families that people almost don't see. So we have like the Denver Indian Center, and then we have the Denver Native American Student Services, and then we've got Jeffco, and there's also one in Cherry Creek and in Adams 12, but it's almost like most of those organizations, whenever our schools are talking, people are always surprised that there is an Indian education department. In Jeffco, we're the largest school district in the Denver metro area, and we have 573 students that are on our 506 list, which is basically a form that applies to our grant, and those students have to be federally recognized and they have to be tribally enrolled. But we have about 3,000 students that actually identify as American Indian that don't have that tribal ID. And so those are students that we're constantly trying to reach. Most of the families I have are out in the south, so Littleton and Lakewood and way out that way. And the arts are super important because it helps kind of reach those students. So in pop culture, a lot of our images are, Pocahontas. So the way you look at a Native person, they have to have the tan skin, they have to have the flowing blonde hair, or blonde hair, dark hair. And we have students that don't look anything like that, but they are affiliated with their tribe and they practice their traditions, and they look at pop culture and the media and they think, there's no actual representation that represents them. Or we have the problem where they start appropriating themselves to try and fit in with their tribes.
Okay.
And that's, with arts and everything, we can kind of shed a more positive light on that and actually allow them to express themselves as to what their tribal relations and artwork actually look like.
Terrific. Tariana?
Hello, can you hear? So I'll start by saying that in our agency, we're very lucky that we have, we have the privilege of having, I think, substantial funds that we can invest in our community. And for us, everything that we invest is through an equity lens. I'm an art historian, and I was a museum curator for many years, so I certainly understand the value of arts for art's sake, but I would say that we don't have the luxury of keeping it that way right now. So for us is arts and social justice, arts and community building, arts, and especially working in government. Arts is the one piece that actually can connect with everything that we do in government, whether it's health, education, etc. And I think arts, I connect very much with what Christina said, because historically, Native peoples as well as people, with Latino heritage, there has been this intense and I think political pressure to assimilate and, to really discard our own culture, and that has been even just part of our laws. Native kids until just recently were taken into boarding schools away from their parents so that they could learn the white ways, and with Latino cultures, for a long time, you did not want to speak Spanish outside of the home because, you would be looked down or even experience violence. So I think nowadays is how can we bring the arts into the classroom and have, I think, those difficult conversations. I think that creates a buffer and a way in which you can, through culture, address those histories and address those difficult conversations. Because even when we look at what history we're not learning Native history. We're not learning, how our, colonization impacted countries in Latin America. I'm Puerto Rican. I'm a citizen. But my history is very different than a Mexican American. So I think is navigating those conversations that for teachers can be very difficult. I think the arts can provide those tools to celebrate those differences, as I said earlier, and then address the conversation of our critical historical times that have created a country that is very racist. And I think it's important for kids to know that history. And for kids that are, kids on these under-resourced groups, to get a sense of pride of where they come from and what they contribute, because what they're surrounded with, we don't want to address this, but what we're surrounded in terms of media is those same stereotypes. Native people are not Pocahontas. They're living, breathing, active members of society. And the same thing with, Latino people. So I think it's important to, that arts can bring a very rich resource to address those topics. And to the last thing I'll say too, and is that's this example is in Jennifer Harvey's book, is they address she's addressing the story of the 1 little 2 little 3 little Indians and how a kid is singing it, and she wanted to say, well, don't sing that, and the kid is saying, well, why not? And she didn't have to talk about genocide and racial history, but she was able to say, first of all, as an adult, think of how would it feel if we sing that song with 1 little 2 little 3 little black people or gay people, which are actually much more identifiable. Native peoples have been kind of erased in a lot of our histories, right? And being able to tell that kid, well, Native people feel right now, you're actually talking about breathing current community members, they hear that song and it hurts them. It doesn't make them feel good. And then they connect it to their own family value systems and say, and remember when we talk about how respect is important to us and kindness, if it makes Native people feel bad, we don't want to do that. Right. And again, so I go back to the special age. There's no special age, but there's different ways to address those histories.
Terrific. And that's a good segue into talking about differentiated needs, and in particular special needs. And for those of you who think I forgot about Jennifer Stedron at the end of the aisle, I did not. Jennifer's the person I've known the longest on the panel, and when I think of her, I know that she has a lot of expertise on early childhood, and in particular in talking about special needs in early childhood education. So Jen, if you could talk a little bit about the challenges and opportunities within early education for serving children with special needs, that would be a real great contribution to this conversation.
So I hope after I answer, you won't not call on me again, because I'm going to be a little bit of a Debbie Downer here for a moment. So I think we have to think about all of this within a larger context. I do a lot of policy work, so we obviously always start with the child and family, but then we think about what are the programs that serve that child and family within what sorts of neighborhoods and cities and systems and state policy, et cetera. And I think one thing we have to know here is that in the next 8 years, Colorado is going to have 21% more children under 5 coming into the state or being in the state. At that same time, actually, in the next 7 years, it is predicted by our Department of Labor and Employment that the need for early childhood educators is going to rise by up to 43%. So we are in a crisis, and it's worse outside of the Denver metro area, and we have to think about that context when we think about these issues. So I'll just keep being a downer for a moment here. So when we go into rural Colorado, and there are so few trained educators to serve young children and so few seats for those children in the early childhood arena, and you are a provider and you have a child that is somehow, I'm going to say challenging, quote unquote, and you've got a waiting list a mile long, it is very easy to say, I'm not going to serve this family because there's other families in need. And we have to really think about the economics of the situation and how that is impacting families in need, to really think about how we're going to have some solutions to this. So that's sort of one thing I want to say. Now I'm going to get worse for just a moment. There was a study done by Chalkbeat, Colorado last year on suspensions and expulsions in the early years, K through 3. And by the way, it's worse before kindergarten. So they found that of the documented out-of-school suspensions and expulsions in K through 3, a full 1/3 were children with some sort of identified special need. Some districts, that is more than 50%. So the disproportionality of that is terrifying. And I'm going to stop. What it says to me is that we need to think about other solutions outside of school, outside of traditional care and learning centers, while we continue to work on professional development, continue to work on recruitment and retention within the field. So I'll stop there, and hopefully you'll ask me another question.
Well, and I can affirm you're one of the sunniest people I know, so normally Jennifer's not a big Debbie Downer. But on that note, you know, as you talk about other solutions that need to happen and other ways we need to inspire creativity and inclusion, I am going to kick this question to you in a second, Shelby. So this is your advanced organizer. But when I first took over my job 2 years ago, one of the first people I met was Akua, and I became very familiar with the great work that Wolf Trap has done around arts integration in early childhood. And she showed me some of her ways she teaches young children counting and math. And I'm so inspired by so many great techniques around integrating arts into early learning. So Shelby, why don't you give me your take on how can we integrate the arts into early learning classrooms? Now we're going from the community into a classroom to create a more inclusive learning environment for a child.
So integrating the arts actually assists a child in several different ways. And one of the main ways that I think of when I hear of arts integration is the ability to reach a child where they're at. With so many children and so many schools, and the way that the schools teach is through visual, auditory, and through logical, mathematical segments. I mean, that's the way these teachers have been taught. If we think and take a step back and we start to think about all the other ways that those children could be intelligent, including the musical intelligence, kinesthetic intelligence, all of those different ways to reach those children that aren't being taught in the education system. So allowing them, especially as their first education experience, to realize that they are cared for and that school is fun and interesting and exciting, and they care about how I learn specifically is huge in a child's life. There's nothing like being a parent and knowing that when you send your kid off to school, to preschool, that they love going there every day and not having to worry about having to force them to go to school. So I think that arts integration definitely does that for a child. And I also think it's a great way to bring in social and cultural awareness through different types of visual arts and have conversations and open dialogue about different cultures.
Okay, so I want to make sure I leave us some time for questions, but Jennifer, I want to give you a chance to redeem yourself and dig yourself out of the downtrodden place you're in. Would you like to hop on that question, or do you want to address PD?
Yes, and I have happiness to report.
Okay.
So a few things, and I'll start at the policy level, the classroom level, but I do want to move back into the community level. So one thing I would love for you all to know is that the state has early learning and development guidelines for children ages birth through age 8. They are endorsed by the Department of Education, the Department of Human Services, actually our Department of Public Health and Environment. So these are for all kids in all settings about what's developmentally appropriate for children, that children should know and be able to do, and how do we work on that. And art starts in those guidelines at age 3. So I think there's something to look at here, no matter how you work with children, and something to share with people to say, this starts early on, and we can all play a role in this. I think, Tariana, you said, there are many, many places where children live and are served, and we all have a role in working on that. And guess what? The state agrees with that. So let's think about how to connect those. So, and then I just want to give a shout out to a few more things. The city of Denver has an amazing program called 5x5 for children that are served by Head Start, and it says every child in the city that's in a Head Start classroom has the opportunity to experience 5 cultural experiences by the age 5 with this sort of passport thing. So the access is there. Maybe we don't always see that being actualized by families. So here's another piece of hope. The Children's Museum, the Denver Art Museum, the Museum of Nature and Science had embarked on a study with a bunch of focus groups last year to say, how can we be more inclusive? How can we make sure families know we're a welcoming place? And they found out a lot about families in some particular neighborhoods in Denver. Cole was one of them. Elyria Swansea was another one. And families feel somewhat judged in these institutions. And families feel that they may not be for them and for their children. And it's incumbent upon us to fix that. That is not the family's problem. That is our problem, and it is a fixable problem. So I think if we think about the resources that we have in Denver, the great things going on, and feel the responsibility for us to connect the dots so that we understand how to serve a child and family, I think we'll go really, really far. And there are cities that say, you know what, we're going to do the theme in our kindergarten or pre-K classroom, and the arts and cultural institutions are going to reflect that this fall, and we're all going to work together on that piece for children. That's what I would love to see, and I think that's really, really possible here.
It's terrific. And on that note, I would like to open it up and see if anybody out there has any questions for us. I encourage you to introduce yourself, tell us where you're from, and ask a question. How about over here?
Hi, I'm Dana Murphy. I'm an art teacher in DPS. And
Okay.
I was just wondering where is the best way to access maybe a list of
has a community partnership system, and I've been told it's available for families and educators to go online and search by the type of programming that they're looking for. And those of us that are a part of that system are required to update that 3 times a year. So it's very available.
Also, a lot of the SCFD Tier 3 organizations do a lot of work with DPS. However, navigating the DPS system is very difficult. So I think for a lot of organizations, if they can make that connection directly with you, you become the opening the door. The other thing I'll mention is we actually in the city have a program. It's called Youth One Book One Denver, and actually the star of that program is right there, Brooke Dilling. So go and talk to her. But it's a summer program that focuses on a book, 9 to 13. They also have a book for younger audiences. But the key is about bringing literature to life through the arts. And right now, what she's been working on is creating a guide that teachers can actually use in the classroom as well as an after school. So that's also a very accessible way. So make sure you connect with her.
Terrific. The first person I saw was right here, second row. You're looking around with glasses on. Tell us where you are, where you're from, and ask your question. Thank you.
My name is Emily Albers, and I'm here with the Education Department at Colorado Ballet. I actually don't have a question. I wanted to add on a resource that's the SCFD's Explorable Places. It's a really new online platform that only a couple cities in the country are using, but they're, what is the book called? The directory is now all going to be online, and it's called Explorable Places. A lot of the tier 2s and 3s have a full platform on there, and tier 1 and 2 have a full platform, and tier 3s may also, but it's at a different level of what you can see, so then it directs you to their webpage. I have some little cards. If anybody is interested, find me later. I have Explorable Places cards.
Terrific. Thank you. Okay, over here in the back.
Hayini Washte, good morning. I want to thank our Indigenous sisters for coming out and being leaders in the arts and cultural program. I'm with Spirit of the Sun. We do a lot of empowerment with our young people with financial literacy, and we're going into the arts. Just want to lay down the fact that this tribe, there's 53 tribes that were locally home to Colorado, and now there's only 2. And so the need and importance for arts and culture is huge in our state. A lot of you wear turquoise jewelry or have Indian painting in your office. And so when you say, oh man, I don't know how to teach natives, you're investing into us, so thank you. My question to our Indigenous sisters are, we know National Native American Heritage Month is coming up. How do we appropriately celebrate and teach in the arts and culture about the Indigenous communities, especially for Day of the Dead, when people think about it and want to wear that as a costume? And how do we teach our young people that with a lot of non-minorities in the room about teaching them that, so it can be a huge teaching moment?
I'll take the Day of the Dead one, and I'll let Christine. By the way, I'm Puerto Rican. We don't celebrate Day of the Dead. I'll just start there. But I think the importance is Day of the Dead is a good place to start, but we really want to move beyond that. I think because obviously just because of the date is so connected to Halloween, and it's so not about that. It's really about celebrating the dead ones that have passed and celebrating their life. And so I think it's the critical piece is to not forget where that comes from, and the opportunity to use, again, the arts and culture to teach that to youth, but certainly making the distinction. And obviously cultural appropriation is a whole different conversation that I'm not going to get into it. But anyhow.
And then I was actually going to do a shout out for Spirit of the Sun, so good to know that you're here. But for Native American Heritage Month, there's actually a curriculum that just came out by the Ute, Southern Ute tribe that is one of the other only tribes in this area still. And they have a whole curriculum that follows basic lines of Indigenous knowledge. I just got a chance to download it. It's amazing. You can actually download it if you look up the Colorado Commission of Indian Affairs. It's downloadable. It goes through all of the different chapters. And then there's plenty of organizations around here. Spirit of the Sun is one. DU does a Fibonacci math that is around Indigenous knowledge to help out with. There's Jeffco, Indian Education. We have a curriculum as well that follows the Circle of Courage. So that's belonging, independence, mastery, and generosity. And then just in terms of the locations here, you could go to the Denver Indian Center. They have plenty of events and stuff going on. There's some financial literacy things that are going on. These are all events that you can share with your students. And then when you research online, there's the Denver Indian Commission has a resource guide of how many Native businesses there actually are here in Denver. So if you look up the Denver Indian Commission, that's also a downloadable link that has a whole list of everybody that has a business here in the Denver metro area that is Indigenous, and some suggestions of who to call into your classrooms as well. So, yeah.
Terrific. Do we have anybody else in the room with a burning question right up here?
It's related to what you guys just spoke about.
And who are you and where are you from?
I work at a preschool in Greenwood Village.
Okay.
Last year I moved here from Washington, D.C., and when I lived there, I tried to, every November, teach the kids about our local Native people who had, risen to prominence. And one of the things when I first started teaching again, I didn't know that as a child we called it sitting Indian style, and then we grew up and it's now crisscross applesauce. And I was like, okay. But in November, I wanted to tell kids, like, okay, we're all sitting around in this circle. I don't know if I'm being totally insensitive. I'm like, I called it Indian style when I grew up, and we would say we're having a powwow, and we're going to discuss things together, and we're going to share stories. And I tried to do it as a way to honor the Native heritage, but I don't know if I'm just, like, completely ignorant and I'm doing something wrong. I want to help kids remember, like, positive things about culture, not just, well, everybody was destroyed. I want them to learn about the beauty of what has survived, of what's being built today. And I don't want to be insensitive about it.
So there's another website that's called We Are Native. That is an awesome website to go to. It's run almost entirely by Native youth. And they have a bunch of personal stories. They've got some stuff of highlights about their sports. And then there's actually a whole bunch of articles that get run around this time for Halloween and for Native American Heritage Month. I would say to try to stay away from using the word powwow when you're wanting to have a meeting, because powwows are kind of more like dances. And that is a microaggression for a lot of people. If you say, oh, we're going to go have a powwow, they get very frustrated. And then same with the crisscross applesauce. Circles are actually restorative practice, and they're also just Indigenous learning in general. So circles, there's nothing wrong with saying, all right, we're going to circle up and we're going to have a circle. In Jeffco, we do a talking stick. So we'll do a full round in a circle, and we call it ceremony as well, because a lot of our ceremonies are done that way. We're in a circle and we start with one person talking, and then we go all the way around so that everybody has a chance to share. So that's a very core Indigenous knowledge way of teaching that without saying we're going to have a powwow and stick something in the middle for a fire. That's happened before too. But We Are Native is an awesome place to look up. In terms of representation here in Denver, we're actually bringing Indigenous Comic-Con here to Denver this summer. So those are all kind of ways that we're bringing actual awareness of these people are still alive. Pop Culture Classroom did a story on Sand Creek that I actually had the pleasure of illustrating. That's a really good learning resource because it talks about Sand Creek in a way that is hopeful and acknowledges the fact that that was a massacre and that was a horrible thing, but it didn't wipe everybody out. And that's the hard part, is a lot of people read about these massacres and they just assume that genocide wiped everybody out. So with that Sand Creek story, it was actually the story of an elder in our community and her history. And so I interviewed her and we illustrated it, and it's all about how she grew up and was an amazing member of the community and had family, and now her family's still alive, and it's looking at it as they survived and they found a way to thrive. So
I just wanted to
Okay.
mention, just quickly that I think I just want to applaud the fact that you ask the question, because I think so often you feel like, I don't want to be insensitive, I don't want to ask the question. And I would say that, there may be days that as a person of color, I may not be in the space to teach you about my culture, but I would say that is always appreciated. And the other thing I would say is that, when Christine talks about the talking stick and all of that, there are certain things, and not specifically that, but have either a sacred meaning or have a cultural piece that I would say, if you're not the owner of that culture, then either ask the question before you do it or stay away from it until you know. It's the same thing in terms of like your jewelry. Like I have a lot of native jewelry, but for me is either it has been gifted to me by a native artist, I have purchased, I supported the native artist, I didn't get it at Target. So I think it's all of those nuances, because this is such imperfect work that we will all make mistakes. So I would say for white people, just be vulnerable and just know that this is a long road. And for people of color, I would say just be generous, because it's going to take all of us to make a difference.
So on behalf of everybody in this room, I appreciate how generous the four of you have been with your expertise and your time. As I mentioned, their bios are in your programs. I assume you all are happy to have anybody reach out to you if they have more questions. As I mentioned at the top of the panel, I mentioned that we were Facebook Live. It's incumbent upon me now to remind you of that and to say that this concludes the live stream portion of this conference. And with that, I ask you in joining me in thanking this terrific